They don't crave distance. They crave safety. And if you don't understand that distinction, you will misinterpret everything they do. Here's the truth most people never hear. The avoidant nervous system is not wired against love. It's wired against danger. And danger to them doesn't look like abuse or chaos. Danger looks like pressure. It looks like expectations. It looks like emotional demands they don't feel equipped to meet. So when intimacy rises, their body doesn't say, this is connection. Their body says, this could cost me my freedom. And every human being will protect what they believe keeps them alive. What they crave in intimacy is not intensity. It's permission. Permission to be imperfect. Permission to be quiet. Permission to move slowly without being punished for it. Deep down, they want to feel, I can be here as I am, and I will not be overwhelmed, judged, or controlled. Avoidants carry a silent belief that love comes with conditions. Somewhere in their story, connection became associated with loss. Loss of autonomy, loss of self, loss of peace. So when intimacy grows, their mind says, stay alert. Their heart whispers, I want this. And their nervous system slams the brakes. They crave closeness that doesn't demand explanation. They want to be understood without interrogation. They long for a presence that says, you don't owe me access to your soul to be worthy of love. And when they sense that kind of grounded energy, something powerful happens. Their guard softens. Here's a deeper truth. Avoidants don't shut down because they don't care. They shut down because they care more than they know how to hold. Their silence isn't emptiness, it's overload. Their withdrawal isn't rejection, it's regulation. They crave intimacy where respect leads emotion, where connection feels spacious, not suffocating, where love is an invitation, not a demand. Because when love becomes a demand, it triggers their oldest fear. I will lose myself to keep you. What they want but can say out loud is this: please don't make me the source of your emotional stability. Let me choose you, not feel responsible for you. That's not cold, that's honest. And honesty is the doorway to real intimacy. They crave partners who are anchored in their own worth. Partners who don't chase, don't collapse, don't beg for reassurance, but stand firmly in self-respect. Because when they see strength without control, love without pressure, and presence without expectation, their nervous system finally relaxes. And here's the divine principle hidden in all of this. Love grows where freedom is honored. Control creates resistance. Safety creates openness. You cannot force intimacy. You can only invite it. When an avoidant feels emotionally safe, they become deeply loyal, surprisingly tender, and profoundly committed. But safety isn't created through words. It's created through consistency, calm, and self-mastery. The ultimate transformation happens when you stop trying to pull them closer and start becoming someone who doesn't need to pull at all. Because intimacy is not about how tightly you hold. It's about how safe someone feels resting beside you. And the moment they feel that, they stop running. Not because they were trapped, but because they finally felt free enough to stay. Most people assume that what avoidance? Fear is closeness. But that belief is incomplete and misleading. What they actually fear is emotional danger. Their nervous system has learned, often very early in life, that intensity equals risk. Raised voices, overwhelming emotions, expectations they can't meet, or love that feels conditional taught them one core lesson. Staying regulated means staying in control. So when intimacy begins to deepen, their body reacts before their mind has time to reason. It's not that they don't want connection. It's that their system scans for safety first, always. Emotional safety for an avoidant means knowing they won't be judged for needing space, criticized for not expressing feelings on demand, or punished for pulling back to recalibrate. Intensity feels unpredictable to them. It feels like a wave that might knock them over, consume their autonomy, or demand a version of themselves they're not ready to offer. Safety, on the other hand, feels steady. It feels like being allowed to exist without performance. And that is the soil in which intimacy can actually grow for them. When emotional intensity comes too fast, Avoidants often experience internal pressure. Their heart may want closeness, but their body feels flooded. They begin to shut down not because they don't care, but because they care and don't trust themselves to handle what's being asked. This internal conflict is exhausting. The more someone pushes for emotional expression, reassurance, or constant connection, the more the avoidance system interprets it as a threat to their independence and emotional equilibrium. What they crave instead is a partner who can stay emotionally present without becoming emotionally demanding. Someone who doesn't confuse intensity with depth. Someone who understands that true intimacy isn't built through constant talking, processing, or emotional escalation, but through consistency, reliability, and calm presence. For an avoidant, safety is felt when love doesn't spike their anxiety, when connection doesn't come with emotional debt, and when closeness doesn't mean obligation. Emotional safety also means not being forced to explain themselves repeatedly. Avoidants often struggle to articulate what's happening inside them because they were never taught that their inner world would be received with patience. Being asked to just talk about it can feel like being asked to perform under pressure. Safety comes from being allowed to take time, to feel first and speak later, without the threat of abandonment or anger looming in the background. When an avoidant senses emotional safety, something remarkable happens. Their defenses soften. Their nervous system downshifts. They begin to offer closeness organically, not reactively. They lean in because they want to, not because they feel cornered. This is when their capacity for intimacy expands, not through force, but through trust. Safety becomes the bridge between distance and connection. And once that bridge is stable, emotional intimacy no longer feels like a risk, but like a choice. At the core of the avoidant experience is a quiet exhaustion that comes from feeling like love requires constant effort, explanation, and self-correction. Many avoidants grew up in environments where affection was tied to achievement, emotional caretaking, or meeting unspoken expectations. Over time, they internalized the belief that being loved meant being useful, composed, or easy to deal with. So when intimacy develops in adulthood, a familiar pressure arises, the sense that they must show up a certain way to be acceptable. What they crave, often without having the language for it, is acceptance without performance. They want to know that they are valued even when they don't have the right words, the right tone, or the emotional availability someone else might want in that moment. Being asked to constantly explain their feelings, reassure their partner, or fix emotional discomfort triggers an old survival response. It tells their nervous system, you are failing at closeness. And nothing shuts an avoidant down faster than feeling like a disappointment. Avoidants often experience intimacy as a series of tests they didn't agree to take. Are you open enough? Are you expressive enough? Are you consistent enough? Even well-intentioned questions can feel like evaluations rather than invitations. This creates an internal tension where they want to stay connected, but also want to escape the feeling of being measured. The more they feel evaluated, the more they retreat into silence, not out of defiance, but out of self-protection. Acceptance to an avoidant is felt through emotional neutrality and steadiness. It's the sense that they can show up exactly as they are, quiet, uncertain, or even emotionally distant, and still be met with respect. When someone doesn't rush to fix them, doesn't dramatize their withdrawal, and doesn't take their need for space personally, it sends a powerful message: you don't have to earn your place here. That message is profoundly healing. They also crave relief from the unspoken responsibility of managing another person's emotions. Many avoidants learned early that they had to stay composed because someone else couldn't. So in adulthood, they are hypersensitive to emotional volatility. When a partner looks to them for regulation, reassurance, or emotional grounding, it can feel overwhelming. What they long for instead is a partner who can self-soothe, who doesn't collapse when connection fluctuates, and who doesn't make the avoidant responsible for their emotional stability. When avoidants experience acceptance without pressure, something shifts internally. The need to guard, to minimize, or to disappear slowly loosens. They begin to feel curious rather than defensive. They open not because they are forced to, but because it feels safe to do so. In that space of acceptance, intimacy stops feeling like a task and starts feeling like a shared experience. Love becomes something they can participate in freely, without fear of being exposed as inadequate or emotionally insufficient. For an avoidant, intimacy becomes threatening the moment it feels like it will take something away, rather than add something meaningful. They are not afraid of connection itself. They are afraid of losing their sense of self inside it. Many avoidants learned early that closeness required sacrifice, sacrificing personal needs, emotional boundaries, or independence to keep the peace. So when intimacy grows, an internal alarm goes off warning them that they may once again have to give up who they are to maintain connection. What they crave instead is intimacy that feels empowering. Empowerment for an avoidant means choice. It means being able to step toward connection without feeling trapped by it. When intimacy feels optional rather than obligatory, their resistance softens. They want closeness that enhances their life, not absorbs it. Intimacy that supports their individuality rather than replacing it. When they feel their autonomy is respected, they no longer experience closeness as a threat. Avoidants are highly sensitive to any dynamic that feels controlling, even subtly. Repeated demands for reassurance, expectations of constant community, cation, or emotional reactions that punish distance can all register as control. Even when these behaviors come from a place of love, they trigger the avoidant's fear of being consumed. Control to them feels like losing the ability to breathe freely within the relationship. That's why they instinctively pull back when they sense pressure, even if they care deeply. Empowering intimacy communicates, "You are free to be here." It allows space for silence without interpreting it as rejection. It honors personal rhythms instead of trying to synchronize everything. For an avoidant, nothing builds trust faster than being trusted with their own pace. When they are not monitored, chased, or emotionally cornered, they begin to lean in naturally. The paradox is powerful. The more freedom they feel, the more connection they offer. Avoidants also crave being admired for who they are, not just how they show up emotionally. They want their strengths, values, and individuality to be recognized. When intimacy focuses solely on emotional exchange, they can feel reduced to what they are not providing. Empowering intimacy includes shared experiences, mutual respect, and appreciation beyond emotional disclosure. This helps them feel seen as a whole person, not a project to be fixed. When intimacy becomes empowering, avoidants start to associate closeness with expansion rather than contraction. Their nervous system relaxes. Their defenses lower. They become more willing to share, to initiate, and to commit, not because they are pushed, but because they feel safe to choose. In this kind of dynamic, intimacy no longer threatens their independence. It strengthens it. And in that safety, connection transforms from something they resist into something they willingly protect. Avoidants are deeply attuned to the difference between being desired and being needed, even if they can't always explain it. Being chosen freely feels affirming. Being chased desperately feels heavy. When pursuit carries urgency, anxiety, or emotional dependence, it activates their instinct to retreat. Not because they don't value the person pursuing them, but because the energy of desperation signals a loss of balance. It suggests that the relationship is no longer a mutual choice, but a necessity for one person's emotional survival. And that is precisely what avoidants fear. Many avoidants grew up feeling responsible for other people's emotional states. They learned that closeness meant obligation, that love meant carrying weight that wasn't theirs. So when someone demands reassurance, constant availability, or emotional guarantees, it reinforces the belief that intimacy will cost them their freedom. Chasing doesn't feel like affection to an avoidant. It feels like pressure disguised as love. And pressure creates resistance every time. What they long for instead is to be chosen by someone who stands firmly in their own worth, someone who wants them, but doesn't need them to feel whole. That distinction is everything. When an avoidant senses that a partner has a full life, emotional stability, and a grounded sense of self, attraction deepens. They feel safer stepping forward because they're not being pulled, they're being invited. Desperation collapses polarity. It shifts the dynamic from mutual desire to emotional imbalance. Avoidants are especially sensitive to this shift. When someone gives too much, sacrifices themselves, or overfunctions emotionally, it creates an unconscious debt the avoidant never agreed to pay. That debt breeds guilt, and guilt breeds distance. They pull away not to punish, but to escape the weight of unspoken expectations. Being chosen freely also means not being emotionally cornered. Avoidants want space to miss, to reflect, to return on their own terms. When that space is respected, desire has room to grow. When it's violated, desire shuts down. The irony is that chasing is often driven by fear of loss, yet it becomes the very thing that creates it. Avoidants don't respond to urgency. They respond to calm certainty. They crave a partner who can say without words, "I want you, but I don't abandon myself for you." That energy communicates strength, self-respect, and emotional maturity. It tells the avoidant, "You are welcome here, but you are not responsible for me." And that message is profoundly attractive to someone who has spent their life guarding against emotional entanglement. When avoidants feel freely chosen rather than desperately needed, their walls soften. They begin to pursue back, not out of fear, but out of genuine desire. They show up because they want to, not because they feel chased into a corner. In that space, intimacy becomes mutual again, grounded in choice, not compulsion. And for an avoidant, choice is the doorway through which real commitment finally enters. Beneath the silence of an avoidant lies a depth of longing that often goes unseen. Their quiet is not emptiness, and their distance is not indifference. It is protection. Many avoidants learned early that being fully seen led to criticism, misunderstanding, or emotional overload. They adapted by minimizing their needs, keeping their inner world private, and revealing only what felt safe. Over time, this strategy became so ingrained that even when they want to be known, they don't know how to open the door without feeling exposed or vulnerable to loss. What they crave most is to be seen without being dissected, to be recognized without being analyzed. Avoidants often fear that if someone truly sees them, they will be found lacking, too distant, too slow, or emotionally insufficient. So when they sense scrutiny, even loving scrutiny, they retreat. But when they sense quiet recognition, something far more powerful happens. Being seen for them is not about being fully understood in words. It's about being respected in presence. They want their internal experience to be acknowledged without being corrected. Statements that imply they should feel differently, respond faster, or want more closeness land as subtle rejections of who they are. Respect, in this context, means allowing their emotional rhythm to exist without judgment. Trust means believing that their way of connecting, even if different, is still valid. When an avoidant feels trusted, they no longer need to hide behind emotional distance. Avoidants also crave being believed. Many have been told, directly or indirectly, that something is wrong with them, that they're cold, unavailable, or incapable of deep love. Over time, these labels become internalized, creating shame they rarely voice. What they want but can't easily ask for is someone who sees beyond the defense and believes in their capacity to love, even when it isn't always expressed in obvious ways. Being trusted with that belief is profoundly healing. When avoidants feel genuinely seen and respected, they begin to reveal themselves in subtle but meaningful ways. It might show up through actions rather than words, through consistency rather than confession, through loyalty rather than vulnerability speeches. If those offerings are recognized and valued, their confidence in intimacy grows. If they are dismissed because they don't look emotional enough, the door closes again. At their core, avoidants long for connection that honors their dignity. They want to know they can be close without being misunderstood, valued without being pressured, and trusted without being rushed. When someone meets them there with patience, respect, and quiet faith, the hunger they've carried silently begins to ease. And in that safety, their guarded heart slowly learns that being seen does not have to mean being hurt. Thank you for giving yourself the courage to listen, reflect, and grow. Real transformation begins with awareness. Until we meet again, stay grounded in your worth, trust the process, and remember, true connection always starts within.